There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. In fact, I tell you as your doctor and your friend, straight up, because you told me to give it to you straight. Yes, what's wrong? What ails me? What can I do? Just give it to me straight, doc. Okay, now, can you give that to me in medical terms? So I have something against you. You have left your first love. You know, there's a principle that I believe in. It relates to the physical law, spiritual momentum in our lives as we grow up in the church. Now, I want you to think about the first time that you have accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I remember mine, 1986, November 24th, 11:54 p.m. We started off so hot, didn't we? Full of zeal, fire for God. But in due time, we become professionally stale. And I could say, Peter, why so soon? Why so soon did you turn away from Jesus? Because it only took 3 years for Jesus to betray. I mean, if you really, really look at the life of Peter, come on. He had fallen asleep while Jesus had one of the most greatest transfiguration. He had cut off one of the Roman soldiers' ears. Now, he didn't want to eat what God considered clean, right? And I think this is worse. Not only did Jesus say to the church of Ephesus, you know what, you lost your first love, but Peter, Jesus said, you know what, you of little faith. Now, can you imagine Jesus walking into your life right now and looking at you and says, you know what, Charles, you of little faith. Kevin, you of little faith. Come on. And not to mention, probably the worst, Peter denied Jesus 3 times as he was in the courtroom and saw Jesus. And as the crowd says, there he is, one of the disciples of this man of Nazareth. And then Peter said, I don't know him 3 times. Now, last week, we learned that even Genesis started off with darkness. And I shared with you that, you know what, how did God break that darkness? By saying, let there be light. And in the book of John, I also shared with you that even the book of John concludes with darkness, but I told you last week that John broke that darkness by wow. He explains that he made breakfast for his disciples. Now, I bet it was really, really good. It was something very special. And now, did you know that there is a very, very significance about Jesus building or making breakfast for his disciples? Now, did you know that in ancient time, I live? So you know what? You inviting someone over for dinner or meal, it really means that, you know what? Verse, this is an actual promise that Jesus made. Is that, you know what? If you come into my life, I will eat and I will dine with you. But you see, to eat a meal with somebody who has done you something wrong is also a gesture of forgiveness. I'm willing to reconcile. You know what? I don't have anything against you. So hey, let's have a meal together. And so Jesus invites not only all the disciples, but Peter. And he says, you know what? I'm going to make you the best fish fillet sandwich or breakfast that you have ever witnessed. But it's also a sign of that, you know what? No longer I hold anything against you. And the verse that he says, what we read in verse 15 through 17, this is the intimate relationship and the conversation that he has over the breakfast. Now, I thought about something. You know what? God didn't have to. Jesus didn't have to invite Peter for breakfast. You know, I thought of something. Is that, you know what? He could have found somebody else. He could have found somebody better, someone smarter, someone better looking, someone maybe not quick to judge, or maybe, you know what, someone who's not willing to betray. But here's the principle that I learned over the years. Even though Jesus does not need our help, but he wants our encouragement. Same here. He didn't need Peter. He didn't need the fifth in a friendly public to all of his. And the third is a commission. Then I want you to go and feed my sheep, tend my sheep, and take care of my sheep. So, verses and whatever. But Tim Keller writes that he says the last stage of spiritual maturity is, do you guys want to take a wild guess? It's evangelism. To be able to go and share. Why? You have this desire. You know what? I cannot self-contain. But once again, we have this called the spiritual entropy has developed in the church. Is that, you know what? Go back. That was in my heart. But the spiritual entropy has settled in the church. You know, we become what? Kind of a spiritual couch potatoes. And what Tim Keller is saying, you know what? The reason why the highest level of spiritual maturity is this thing called the Great Commission, the call. The second time he says, do you love me? Same thing, phileo. But the last, he finally realizes the great. Why was he so urgent? What Tim Keller is saying, you know what? You cannot say I love you without sharing the gospel to other people. Now, could it be that the act of making disciples, we actually become more of who Christ designed us to be? You see, at the center of Christ, who Christ was you know, honey, this is the best thing that I've done this week. To share the gospel to people who do not know who Jesus Christ is. Because it gives me a place to apply what I'm learning. You see, some of you guys are just taking this thing in, and you will never understand the heart of the Father or even the heart of the Son, wishing you that, you know what, would you go? Do you love me? Would you go and share that love to someone? Told me his last will and testament. And I knew that if my dad had told my mom something, you know, would you do this for me? You know, I knew that my mom would do that. Because why? It's person's last will and testament. Now, once again, the Great Commission is what? Jesus' last will and testament. That was his last wishes. In Matthew chapter 20, go to the ends of the earth. Go and spread the gospel to the ends of the earth. And the second reasons why this Great Commission is the greatest call is because, and I just want to ask, what kind of people in that place? There was no prejudice. We may have prejudice. Seriously, you know what? I would like to speak to God to this person, but I'm not going to speak to God about that person. We have a choice. But Jesus, no. Jesus crucified. But the heart of the Father and Father of the Son says, you know what? It's okay because that's exactly the promise that I've made. Because why? Jesus had love for the lost souls. And lastly, this was simply what God intended. Because he knew that Adam and Eve was going to sin. He knew that he had to bring his son to pay for that penalty. Why? Because last call. Prayers. But Jesus is coming back. But while we're waiting for the Lord's return, I want all of us to be careful. Be careful not to cling on to things of this earth. But rather, things very difficult is just to simply go to the ends of the earth and just tell them what God is doing in my life. Did you know that a great D.L. Moody walked up to a man and asked, hey, are you a Christian? And the man just, from the top of his lungs, says, you know what? He angrily exclaimed, you mind your own business. Who D.L. Moody is. You know what? As I was reading this story, I had this little spark in my heart. It says, you know what? I really want people in San Ramon. Oh, here comes Pastor Ben. I'm serious. Here comes the pastor man. Either you run away or you're going to listen to what God is doing in his life. I would love that. Loving. But I really believe that witnessing is probably the most important that you could do for God. As Christ is asking all of us in this room, do you love me? Oh, he said yes. Jesus, from the cry room, could you come on down, everybody?